Welcome, citizens of Gotham, to The Fire Rises, a Batman podcast focusing on all things The Dark Knight and his world. If you'd like to keep up with the show, you can connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at TFR Batpod. And if you have thoughts, questions, comments, or even suggestions for future episodes of the show, you can reach us by email at tfrbatpod@gmail.com. My name is Eric Carter, and I am your host, and I am joined once again, and as always, by my co-host, Mr. Joseph Fornerado. Joe, happy Independence Day weekend, buddy. How are you doing?
Good, Eric. Happy 4th of July weekend. What's going on?
Yeah, when we're recording this, it is 4th of July weekend. If you're listening in the future and going, what in the world? That's when we're recording. So this will be released just before Independence Day. So with that in mind, I hope all of you out there listening are having a wonderful Independence Day with your families. Stay safe. Keep all your fingers intact. If you're out there shooting off fireworks and the such. But we have a unique episode for you today. We're diving into a comic story, which we like to do now and again. It's not something, that most Batman, uniquely or comically, it's not something that most Batman podcasts do, is actually talk about the comics. And that's the Batman Book Club notwithstanding, because that is what Ryan Lauer excels at. But that's what we're going to do today. Joe, I know you love comics episodes, so are you excited about this one?
Yes, I am, and we'll get into it. But I was I was hoping that my book would come by the time we recorded because I really wanted to read this version, and we were lucky enough to make it happen.
Yes, we were. We both received our new versions of this book, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. But I did want to let you guys know, near the end of this episode, we are going to catch up on some interactions with listeners. It's sort of informal, The Flash catch up. So we're going to talk a little bit about The Flash, not too much. We got a pretty good episode the last time covering our thoughts on The Flash. We all loved it. But we're going to touch on it just a little bit, as well as a few other thoughts from listeners. But the main event of this episode is the newly released, and we're celebrating. It's not an anniversary per se, but we have a brand new absolute edition of Batman 3 Jokers. So that is what we are here to talk about, mostly because Joe and I cannot help ourselves, and we love these absolute hardcovers. And if we're going to spend the money on it, we might as well talk about it, right, Joe?
Oh, absolutely. I wouldn't even know if that's getting our money's worth, but it's an excuse to read it right away. I will say, for me, I made sure I made time to really dive into this absolute edition.
Yeah, absolutely. So, just to give a little background on this book before we dive into the story, Joe, this had a long and strange path to hitting the store shelves. Um, if I'm correct, this concept was originally teased in, was it Dark Side War? Is that where it was?
Yes, it was. Yes, because it was when Batman is sitting on the Mobius chair.
Yeah, correct. You're right. And he asks the Mobius chair, just to verify that it's omnipotent as it is. He asks who killed his parents, and of course the chair tells him Joe Chill, and then he asks him who the Joker is, and we find out later that um, the Mobius chair informed him that there are 3 Jokers, which was a long-standing thread that we were all excited to see kind of take form and see what that was all going to lead to. And Joe, I think I'm just going to go ahead and say my biggest nitpick of this story right off the bat is it has absolutely nothing to do with any of that.
Yeah, I don't know if there were changes with what they wanted to do. This basically, I don't even know if I want to say this is a standalone. It more just acts as a sequel to Death in the Family and The Killing Joke, which I think is
Mhm.
awesome. It's just weird coming off of how they plugged it or how they promoted it.
Yeah,
Actually,
because
not even. I shouldn't even say promoted it. How they teased it originally, because I don't think it was ever promoted from that. But I don't know.
I don't think they ever made mention of, this is associated with Dark Side War, or the Mobius chair, because I don't know, just off the top of my head, reading this book, this Batman in this story doesn't strike me as someone who has sat on the Mobius chair. Because everything that happened, as we go along in this story and we find out, because it's kind of a mystery that's unraveling between Batman, Batgirl, and Red Hood. It's like and the police force in Gotham, because we're noticing there's these three, there's these instances where the Joker is showing up at different places and it's not possible because it's at the same time, but there's no mention. It's like this Batman has no idea that, there were three Jokers. He's finding this out at the same time as we are. Does that
Hmm.
make sense?
Yeah, definitely.
So yeah, I mean, I know the concept was born out of Darkseid War, but I think it evolved into something completely different. And like you said, I see it very much as, and it works really well as a pseudo sequel to The Killing Joke and Death in the Family.
Well, and also just to piggyback on what you were just saying, the last page of the book completely contradicts Darkseid War because he asks who the Joker is on the Mobius
Hmm.
chair. Which why would he
Yeah.
have done that if the last page of this book is I hate using that word, but canon? Because I don't even know where this would fall in canon. But to me, I still say it all the time.
Well,
Canon is whatever you want it to be.
it is, yeah. But I mean, this is a black label book. So technically, it is not canon in any way.
I have never heard that verified one way or the other because I'm pretty sure in the beginning, like there were black label books that could have been canon.
I mean, yes, but Black Label book in the beginning was also supposed to be free reign
Yeah,
for
there's a
artists and
lot of
writers.
everything is a little muddy.
Yeah, for sure. But let's get into this story, Joe. So, this story, it first of all, I love the way it starts because it's a classic start to a Batman story. I feel because Batman is coming home from a night of fighting crime and he's a little worse for wear. And I love, as we see the Batcave and you see all these little homages to the past, we see all these flashbacks while Alfred is stitching Bruce up. And you see all these scars that he has, and they show all these different, encounters. Like each scar has a story, and each scar is from one of Batman's rogues gallery. And aside from just not really having anything to do with the rest of the story, I love seeing these flashbacks of classic versions of the characters of the villains and kind of showing what this Batman has been through. I just think it's an awesome visual guide through this Batman's history.
Yeah, and I don't even care if this literally was just an excuse to get Jason Fabok's version of these classic stories. It works. I think it's gorgeous. Um, to get right into it, the art in this book is amazing. The art to
Oh yeah.
me is what makes this book. The story is great. I do love the story, but this art to me easily, and I hate to even go there because you know how much I love Greg Capullo. To me, this is the best Batman has looked in a long time. Um, I don't know. I would have a hard time saying any book looked this good in any of my collection. And that I mean, it's different than Capullo. It's different than Jim Lee, but there's just something about the detail and the style of this book that to me is just perfect.
Well, I was gonna say to your point there. I mean, I think the last book before this that I was struck by how good the art was. And yes, Capullo, I absolutely love Capullo. And it's one of my favorite Batman artists. But the last time I remember seeing a book like this that the art just really blew me away was Hush.
Mhm.
And I think that's a testament to Jason Fabok's style because he feels like, and I don't mean to diminish Jason Fabok at all, but it's just, it shows you the level that Jim Lee is on. Fabok feels like the new Jim Lee,
Mm-hmm.
like his Batman. And he really, to my knowledge, he hasn't done Batman since this book. And this book started coming out in what, 2020?
Oh, geez, I don't even remember. 2020 or 2021, because that's one thing I will say with this book. It was delayed and delayed and delayed, but they made sure they had all three books ready to go when they started
Mm-hmm.
releasing the first one. um
Yeah.
I will say, I mean, not to, I mean, this is, I mean, really, what other better place to do a Jason Fabok love fest? But I will say, Dark Side War, as we brought up earlier, I had no idea who Jason Fabok was when I read that story.
Mm-hmm.
That did for me put him on the map and made me recognize his name and want to read more of him, because um, that book is gorgeous. And to see him draw the Justice League and in a monthly title like that, that was a pretty big event. Underrated story. It doesn't get talked about a lot. I actually really enjoy that story. Definitely very different than this because it's very, godly and mythical and pretty pretty insane. But
Mm-hmm.
when I found out from there that he was doing this book, I could not have been more excited because I love that book. There are some really like beautiful splash pages in that book, and to do that on a monthly is even crazier. Where this, you could see that he goes to the next level on this one because they did take their time with this and really just they didn't rush anything with this.
Well, and one thing I'll say is it feels very old school.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's the 9-panel grid, the very classical comics layout. And then, because we were talking about how closely associated it is with um the Killing Joke. I mean, there are panels in this book where if you told me that Brian Bolland drew it,
Mm-hmm.
I would believe you because that's how well Fabok kind of mirrored Boland's style
Mm-hmm.
and not throughout the book because there's definitely it's Jason Fabok art, but when he wants to homage Boland, it's it's pretty freaking spot on, I would say.
Yeah, I got to give credit. I want to see because it. I'm sorry to say, I don't even know who did the colors on this. Um,
Brad Anderson, I
Brad
believe.
Anderson and Rob Lee did the lettering. Um, I think the coloring in this book is beautiful too. We don't give enough credit to inkers and and colorists, and I mean, this was really just an all-star team. I'm
Hmm.
not familiar with Brad Anderson, but if he's working on this book, he has to be included in that group because
Hmm. For
he
sure.
deserves credit too.
And one
Now the
thing, and
nine, I'm sorry, I just had a question for you. The 9-panel grid, was that, because I haven't read Killing Joke in a long time? Is that very prevalent in the Killing Joke, or is that more of Alan Moore's style from Watchmen?
I'm fairly certain that is the layout of the Killing Joke.
Okay,
I
because
could be wrong.
I definitely remember it from Watchmen, but Alan Moore did both, so I'm sure it's his style in general.
Yeah, yeah, I think so too. But we won't focus the whole time on the art. But I mean, it's such a big part of this book. I would say, Geoff Johns wrote a really good story here, but I think it's a really good story that's even more accentuated by even better art. Um, I think the art outstrips the story by a little bit, but that's just to tell you how good it is because I really do think this is a very very good story. Um, and man, this thing, we kind of dove into the story before we talked about it, but this thing was an event when it came out. I mean, there was so many different covers. There was the play. Do you remember the playing cards? Like each issue had its own unique playing
I
card
have
that
them
came with it.
displayed. Absolutely, I
Yeah.
have them. I saved them. I put them in little trading card cases, like little plastic covers.
Hmm.
They're great. Everything about this, everything surrounding this book when it was coming out was just a lot of fun. It felt like it was the first real event for me since when I first started getting back into comics with the New 52, and I was reading the Snyder Capullo run, where that was like,
Mhm.
I needed to go get that book the day it came out, and I got all the variants. With this, I couldn't get all the variants, but I tried. And it was a pricey book to get a couple of variants, but
Yeah,
there's
because it
so
was
many covers.
each issue was I think 48 page square bound premium edition. I mean, they're really nice books, and yeah, there was a ton of variants, which most of the variants are present in this absolute edition, and they even tell you a little bit about the variants. So that's really cool. But to kind of get back into the story here, so I told you that Bruce is getting home. He's all messed up from being out fighting crime, and we kind of go through a backstory where we see the past of him with the Joker. We see the past of the Killing Joke with Barbara and the Joker. We see the past of Red Hood with the Joker, with Death in the Family. So it's kind of setting up that this story is between the three of them. It's a shared kind of trauma between Batman, Batgirl, and Red Hood. And this is one thing I do want to bring up early, because one of the biggest complaints about this story that I've seen is that Batgirl and Red Hood are quote unquote underdeveloped in the story. And I don't know that I
Huh?
agree with that. Yeah, that's one of the major complaints of this story, is that they are underdeveloped and underserved.
They're really, I've never seen that before.
Mhm.
And I completely disagree. You kind of caught me off guard by saying that, because to me, they're the focal point of the story.
Yeah, I mean, and it even says it, because I was just looking through the Wikipedia page, which I know take Wikipedia with a grain of salt, but it says the storyline received positive reviews with praise for the art, story, and character development, despite criticism on the underdevelopment on Red Hood and Batgirl story, which I completely disagree with.
I mean, do they maybe think it's because you kind of have to have some knowledge going in? But I think they do a pretty good job of going back to all that trauma numerous times in the book.
I do too. Yeah, and the whole, I mean, maybe it's because at the end of the day, at the end of the story, Joker really doesn't care about either one of them, but we all know that. We know his obsession with Batman.
Oh yeah, that's
It's
always been the case.
it's not that's not new ground that they've broken here. Um
I thought you were going to say the biggest criticism was their like the emotional relationship they have and where it goes and how it ends up, and because I've seen that criticism, which I
mhm.
also disagree with, but that's one that I can at least understand if people aren't crazy about it. Like I can disagree and still at least understand where people are coming from, because it might be something they're not comfortable with seeing because it's just not what they enjoy or what they like. But as far as their characters being underdeveloped, I completely disagree with that.
I do as well. But yeah, as we go through the story, we find out that there's crimes being committed that kind of mirror some classic Joker crimes that Batman has investigated and been a part of, and we we learn that there's all these things that are happening at the same time, so there's no possible way, and there's been eyewitnesses that the Joker has been at each one of these scenes. So we slowly start to determine that there are in fact three Jokers, and I believe it's at the end of the first issue that we actually get a confirmation of that, because one of the Jokers that has been at this most recent crime scene, he arrives at this cabin in the woods, which looks a lot like the cabin from Evil Dead. I'm just gonna say that. Um, but when he arrives, there's two other Jokers inside, and they all kind of have a distinction to them. They're all slightly different. So that's where I kind of wanted to talk about the different variations of the Joker. Is there anything that stood out to you upon getting to the end of the first issue about these different versions of the Joker?
Um, as far as the first issue, as far as like the look of them goes, because that's really all you
Yeah.
get for the most part. Um, I mean, clearly they make it very clear that the one with the hat is the one from the Killing Joke, which I think is the obvious distinction there.
Hmm.
Um, but I'm trying to remember now. I'm going to go back to that issue. Does he have the hat on when we're first introduced to the two of them? There are the
He
three of them.
does. He has the hat, and he
Because I
has
remember
the
him putting it on in one of the images, but
he has the Hawaiian shirt and the hat on.
okay.
Yeah, and then so I think the biggest thing that stood out to me in this, and you can tell me if I'm just crazy, but I knew like there was this main Joker that was sitting at the table. He's very much more of a stoic Joker, I would say,
Mm-hmm.
and he's got these wrinkles around his mouth, so it feels like he's already meant to look older, be a little bit of an older Joker, and something about the way he looks gives me Jack Nicholson Joker vibes. And I don't know if it's the hooked eyebrows, it's the wrinkles
Yeah,
around the lips.
I don't know.
Just
I didn't see that.
just something about him gives me that vibe, but maybe it's just me.
And the other one has the design from, ironically enough, the Joker figure from the what action figure line was that? But it was the one that like the face paint came off if you put him underwater. And did you have that figure when you were a kid?
Oh gosh, I don't think I did. That's not ringing any bells for me.
But that design with the purple suit and the green shirt underneath and the tie, like that reminds me of that
Mhm.
action figure, which is funny. So that's from like we were talking about it earlier. So like you got the original one, and then that one's probably the one from like the 60s and the 70s. Um,
Yeah,
so that might have been like a superpowers figure. I honestly don't
maybe.
remember.
But yeah, we come to find out there, that their ultimate plan, because they lay it out right from the beginning. So it's not a waiting game to kind of see what the Joker's after. While they're in this cabin, they talk about, their plan is to make a better Joker. So it becomes clear that they are attempting to make a new Joker. So I don't know if you can remember back to when you first read it, or maybe your thoughts here when you were reading it this time. But what do you think of that? Their whole end game is to make a better version of the Joker.
It's sad because I don't know if it's just my memory is shot now, or I don't remember much about reading this for the first time, or I did just kind of skim through this the first time I read it because I just wanted to get to the point, and like
Hmm.
I was enjoying the art, but I wasn't digesting the story as much as I should have because I don't remember a lot of the plot of this story from the first time I read it because I felt like I was reading a lot of it for the first time these last couple of days rereading this. Um, but it's such a cool theory, and when you see where their mission takes them, um, right off the bat, going after Red Hood makes sense from the concept of that story. It's pretty creepy that they're like, okay, now, and then it's like, okay, did they want to make a fourth Joker to best the three of them, or like do they always have a new one and then they step aside? Do they kill off past Jokers? It makes you really think like what the thought process was there, and what the theory is of how this has been going on.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree. I had no idea, where they could have been going with there, and I don't remember my initial reaction to this. But just knowing that they want to create a better version of the Joker is an intriguing concept. Like I'm curious too because there's still a lot of mystery behind the Joker. Like you never find out who these guys really are, which is the whole point behind Joker. I know, but when there's three of them, it puts it even into a whole new spin. Um, but yeah, I love the whole back half of this book, the whole aquarium, because we know that they're going after Red Hood, and Red Hood is at the aquarium. That's where Batman and Batgirl are on their way to as well. And they end up having that when they get there and they're investigating this aquarium, they find out, classic Joker, he's dumped these toxins into the aquarium, and we have a lot of Joker fish now, including probably the biggest Joker fish ever, a massive great white shark that has been turned into a Joker fish, which from a visual standpoint, that is really cool for me. I mean, that thing was. scary looking, and the way it's used in the story, because there's this, this old school sidekick for Joker called Gaggy that this shark is just sicked on, basically, like the
And he's
glass
got to be from the
breaks. And
comics. I forgot to look it up, but knowing Geoff Johns, he has to be a pull from the old days in the comics.
I believe he is, but I would be completely, you know, shooting in the dark to try to tell you where.
Mm-hmm.
But I know he gets a pretty vicious death in this book. Because the Joker, Great White, like is busted through this aquarium, and Gaggy's right in the way of that big mouth. So,
Well,
um,
you could argue it's Jason's first kill because Jason's the one that shoots the tank,
oh,
and
that's
that's what
true.
allows the
Yeah,
shark to come through and kill Gaggy. You could argue he may have done it intentionally if you really want to go down that route, because the way that it's framed, you could make an argument for that.
yeah, I could see that for sure. And even more so when you figure out what he does here at the end, because we have one of the Jokers at the aquarium that ends up getting captured by Batman and Batgirl and Red Hood, and he's left there with Batgirl and Red Hood, and Red Hood ends up shooting him. I mean, that's the end of the first book. Is much to Batgirl's argument, Red Hood shoots him in the head, and I mean, you see I mean, there's a pretty graphic panel of like his brains flying out of one side of his head, and yeah, so we have two Jokers at the end of the first issue, which I will say I thought was a pretty bold way to go out on the first issue. Although then again, I'm thinking, okay, is this Joker even really a Joker? So I don't know. Just the way they ended it there. What do you think of the big finale of the first issue? Is Jason murdering one of the Jokers?
Well, even if it's not one of the Jokers, it's still an awesome way to end because either way you look at it, Jason just killed somebody in front of Barbara.
Mm-hmm.
So it gets the point across no matter what. And I think that's what's so cool about it is you still have a mystery. You still don't know what's going on with the three Jokers, but you still have that great moment at the end with him shooting this person in the head. And I love how he calls out Barbara because Barbara's like, "What did you do?" And she tried to stop him and missed, and he basically calls her out like, "Well, when was the last time you missed? Like, did you really mean to miss?" Um, and you can interpret that many different ways. So I love the ending of this book. I think this is when you have an event book like this and you're only getting 3 issues, which I love that this was just 3 issues. I think because it got to the point it ends on such an exclamation point to get you hooked for the next book, which we were all going to read anyway. But I think it
Mm-hmm.
delivered so well with everything that happened in this first issue.
Yeah, I mean, I do too. And to your point, I mean, Barbara, quote unquote, tried to stop him. She threw a batarang at him, but then at the end of the day, Jason kind of calls her out and says, "Were you really trying to stop me? When's the last time you missed?" You know,
Yeah,
so it's kind of an indicator. We know how tortured all of these people are by Joker. So was there a part of Barbara that wanted him dead? I'm sure. You know. Um, but yeah, moving on, we get into the second book, and the second book is a lot of setup of what's going on with these Jokers, because we see even more crimes. And by the way, um, I'm sure you caught it, but the two thugs from Batman '89 are in this issue.
okay, maybe I didn't catch it.
Yeah, so it's several pages in. It's where they're showing all these crimes that have been committed, and there's this one of those
Oh,
thugs is,
from the
yeah.
beginning. Yes. From the
Hmm.
beginning of Batman '89 in the alleyway. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah,
Was that
so
in the Easter egg section?
I think it is. I'm pretty sure it
Okay,
is.
so you cheated. You saw it on
Well, I mean, I recognized them as I was reading the book, Joe.
there.
Um, but anyway, we come to, and I'm trying to remember. Maybe you can remember a little more than I can. How we ended up going to go see Joe Chill, because we know that Batman is on the way
It was
to Joe
fingerprints.
Chill.
There were fingerprints on the trophy that bludgeoned one of the
The
victims to
judge.
death. Yes.
Yes. Yeah. So we know that the Joker has been targeting all these high profile people in Gotham and people who aren't even high profile, and all these crime scenes lead up to this judge, and there's fingerprints at the scene, which Joe just explained, where it's Joe Chill. So Batman goes to Blackgate to visit Joe Chill, and we find out. I mean, we get, of course, heartbreaking crime alley flashbacks to little Bruce witnessing the death of the Waynes, and we find out that Joe Chill is now in Blackgate Hospital because he is dying of cancer, which I think is I mean, going the sympathetic route for Joe Chill. What do you think of that? That's a unique perspective.
It's one of those things where at first read, it may have felt cheap. Um, I don't remember how I felt, but I don't remember like caring either way.
Mm-hmm.
Reading it all the way through this time and knowing where the story was going did a lot for me. Um, because, and it's hard to talk about this without going right to the end, but it's Batman's ultimate victory. Well, I mean, actually, it's Joker's. Now I'm trying to think. It kind of like by Batman forgiving Joe Chill, it makes Joker his greatest villain, which is pretty crazy. Um, but I also think from a Batman's perspective, you got to take that as a win for Batman, also, right? Like it's pretty. Again, I keep saying the book has more layers than I gave it credit for the first time I read it, and I still liked the book the first time I read it, but I found a lot more. Um, I just got a lot more out of it the second time, seeing where they go with the story and how each thing plays into what they did at the end. It makes a lot of sense, and it goes places that may have seemed obvious in a trivial sense, but when you
Mm-hmm.
really get down to the when you try to look deeper into it, it's not as simple as it may seem if you're just kind of glossing over this book.
Yeah, and I would
And I
say
admit I'm
even
guilty of that. So I understand why some people probably didn't take to this book the first time they read it.
well, yeah, and that's sort of kind of what we have to do when talking, because I mean we can't go beat by beat for the story, so that's sort of what we have to do when we're covering it. But there's a lot of depth in here. I mean, you were talking about it just now, but I mean, even like the next, so the big plot point of this issue is, the Jokers have captured Jason. They've got him at this indoor pool, and they're basically torturing him to turn him into the next Joker. And as straightforward as that seems, I mean, looking at it from that angle, who makes more sense than Red Hood for them to target to turn into another Joker? It makes a ton of sense. I mean, and there's that moment in the book where basically, one of the Jokers tells Red Hood, you know, you took up my mantle basically, you're my
Mm-hmm.
Robin, you
Yeah.
know. And that's I had never ever thought about it from that perspective, but it's absolutely true. I mean, he kills people, he carries the Red Hood moniker. He's pretty distanced from Batman at this point. I mean, it does make a lot of sense in a twisted way.
Without a doubt. I mean, he's always been Batman's greatest failure. So the fact that he's
Hmm.
now even the Red Hood as a Joker, um, if you want to say a moniker or just an alter ego of the Joker, that is almost insult to injury to Batman that he's doing that. And we always looked at it from the perspective of he's doing it to mock the Joker, but it would
Hmm.
make sense that the Joker loves that. Like he would find the positive on that because that's what the
Hmm.
Joker would do. It's it's pretty crazy when you think of like this whole plot line, everything going on with Jason and the Joker, and the Joker. Jason has already killed one Joker, and now he has to face down another one, and he's being told that he's done everything that the Joker has wanted him to do, basically. And I know it gets a lot of flack. It does kind of remind me, and that's not what they're doing here. But a lot of people hated the New 52 origin of Jason. Do you remember
Hmm.
the New 52 origin of Jason?
Vaguely.
Where basically he was like the Joker set him up to be Robin so he could kill him and torture Batman.
Yeah.
And
Right.
I know a lot of people don't like it. It's a little out there. But it reminded me of that because this is kind of the Joker saying like I don't know, to me it kind of fed into that a little bit, but it's not what they're doing. But it kind of reminded me of that where the Joker does use Jason and Barbara to get to Bruce. That's all. And we talked about that. You mentioned that earlier in the episode where it's they're just his pawns. That's it. He only tortures them to torture Bruce. It would be easy to kill Bruce, but it's more fun to torture him through torturing his family.
Well, and these people are brought together by their shared trauma, as I said earlier, and that even leads to one of the most controversial parts of the book, because after Jason is rescued from the Joker in this book, he's taken back to Barbara's apartment, and that leads to the kiss between Barbara and Jason, which I know a ton of people hate. Um, but I never took it as more than I know Jason has stronger feelings, but for Barbara's side, I never took it more than two people with shared trauma having a moment and getting caught up in that moment. And I don't know, what are your thoughts on that? Because I know it's like I said, it's a highly controversial part of the book.
I did not have a problem with it. I think when it first happens, it's shocking, but it's immediately handled the way it should have been handled, in my opinion. And it's spelled out exactly like you just said you took it. Like I don't even think there's a way to misinterpret this. She literally says we shouldn't have done that. I just wanted you to know I care.
Hmm.
That's what it was. Is she was so emotional at that moment of feeling terrible for what Jason is going through. And it was a moment that she just felt like they were sharing and she wanted to kiss him and that was it. It wasn't like this long drawn out thing and I mean he could have very easily had them sleep together and then she says that was a mistake. It was like literally 2 seconds she kisses him and says I'm sorry because she realizes that even though she was doing it to make him feel better, it probably is now going to be interpreted the wrong way and she knows how fragile Jason is, but she just wanted him to be okay. She wanted him to know she cared. Like she flat out says it. And I think it shows the difference in characterizations between these two and how they handle their trauma. That's what makes these characters who they are in this moment. Barbara is someone that has come out of this strong and wanting to help people. Jason
Hmm.
is the one that needs the help. And it's go ahead, I'm sorry.
Oh no, I was just gonna say I completely agree with what you're saying there. Um, it is. I think Jason is the more tortured. Like Barbara has been able to be a little more productive. She's been able to, I don't know, use a little more strength to recover than Jason has. I think Jason's still very much haunted over what happened to him, and he's not able to move past it the way Barbara has. Um, but yeah, I mean, and the way that this issue kind of wraps up here is interesting to me because I still don't quite, because we find out that um, the Jokers have kidnapped Joe Chill. But before we get there, right before that, we see that Batman is in the Batcave and he's investigating case files, and he has separate Joker case files listed missing clowns, missing criminals. And he's reading and viewing these case files on his computer, and it's showing the different versions of the Joker. So I know, and this is jumping ahead, but I know in the final issue Like, we find out that Batman has always known who at least one of these Jokers is. But it's interesting. Is this telling us that he's always had an idea that there's been multiple?
I'm wondering. I took it as like he's going over the possible, and this might have been what you meant. Is he going over the possible aliases of the Joker? Like, these are the clowns that basically could be the Joker. I don't know. Did you also notice that the globe points to Alaska? Because I did not catch that until just this minute.
Well, I mean, I did now, but I mean, I know what that's referring to in the future.
Yeah. Um. So yeah, I don't know. Like, I think.
And it's while he's looking at the comedian. Because it says to the
Oh,
comedian, and then it shows the globe.
that's interesting.
Yeah.
Because the
So
comedian's the 60s, 70s one, correct?
no, that's the clown. The comedian is the one from The Killing Joke.
Okay, so the comedian is the modern one.
Yeah.
Okay. I keep getting them mixed up.
Yeah, but I mean, we can just move on to the third book because that's how it opens. It shows you, there's the three panels, and it shows you, the older one is the criminal, the dead one is the clown, and then the modern Joker, quote unquote modern Joker, is the comedian. Um, which I think is fascinating, because that's what we're doing here at the beginning of the final issue is we're with Batman, Batgirl, and Red Hood, and they're kind of going over the differences in these Jokers. And you and I were talking about it before we started. There's this really important page 6 in the final book, where it pretty much point blank lays out who these Jokers are, what versions they are, which I think is pretty cool. I know you wanted to bring this page up.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where you could take it literally, which I think works, or is it almost giving the reader, hey, a wink wink. These are what we're going for. You know?
Hmm.
I think it could go either way. I think they're kind of, and I think I've said this before. They're not. I don't mean this in a negative way. They're kind of having their cake and eating it too. Like, again, Johns does a really great job, and it's weird because people have criticized him for this, where he like takes old stories and kind of weaves them into continuity. People have said it's like his way of not being original. I disagree. I think he's a genius when it comes to that kind of stuff. He finds ways to make everything canon. And
Hmm.
I think this is kind of his way of justifying the different personifications of the Joker over the years. And you can kind of take it as a literal thing or as this kind of nod to it where is the Joker the same guy and he's just reinventing himself, or have there really been multiple Jokers where one kind of takes over and does its thing? I I find it fascinating that you can kind of do whatever you want with it, because before this, what you were kind of making it up in your head anyway. So in this case, it's a really interesting story that gives you the three Jokers dynamic, but makes it a really personal story on the influence the Joker has had on the Bat family, as opposed to just focusing on who the three Jokers are.
Yeah, and it even goes so far as to show you how much of an impact that Joker has on them, because like Batman and Batgirl are both upset about what Jason did at the end of the first issue, but they lay it out that they can't turn Jason in.
Mm-hmm.
Because Batgirl wants to, but it's Batman that explains to her, and then Red Hood even reiterates it later. You would have to give yourself up to turn
I
me in.
I love that he throws that back in her face. He told you that, didn't he? Like, that's what he knew exactly what Bruce was going to say.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, just even more showing, even unintentionally, what the Joker does and the divides he causes. Um, but yeah, I mean, the ultimate, the end game of this book is that we know that. I think it's fascinating that we find out that Joe Chill has been kind of repentant over what he's done for years, and he's been writing Bruce letters, but he's never sent them. And there's even an explanation that he has a learning disability, and he hasn't he wasn't to the level yet where he was ready to where he thought, I guess, the letters were good enough. But
Mm-hmm.
there's all these letters that they find, and you kind of see Batman start to feel a little sympathy for Joe Chill.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that Joe Chill has been kidnapped by the Joker. He's being held. They find an envelope with a Monarch Theater ticket in it. So of course, part of the big finale here is at the Monarch Theater. And did you notice, Joe, that the Monarch Theater is the one from Batman '89?
Oh, you know, it didn't even occur to me, but yeah, obviously.
Yeah.
For some reason, it was like that. It like almost worked its way into canon in my brain. Like I just thought, oh yeah, the Monarch Theater. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, you're right. I
Yeah.
didn't really think about that.
Yeah. So we get this big, like I said, finale in the movie theater, where Batman saves. He has to save Joe Chill, and he forgives Joe Chill. He tells him he forgives him, um, which the criminal is trying to turn Joe Chill into the new Joker. And he says, they're planning on dipping him in the acid bath. And he says, that basically he'll be trading in physical body because he has cancer. So he'll get his physical body back, but he'll lose his mind and become the new Joker. But of course, Batman stops him. And the most fascinating thing to me here is that the comedian, the more modern Joker, ends up killing the criminal, the older Joker. And come to find out, like, this Joker, he did not want to be part of this plan at all. He just kind of went along with it to appease these other two Jokers. But at the end of the day, he wanted to be the one and only Joker, which makes a lot of sense. I mean, of course, there's that Joker that doesn't want anything to do with being part of a group. He wants to be the one and only. He wants to be the nemesis to Batman, if that makes sense.
Oh, definitely. And you could again, looking at it from another perspective, was he always the original Joker? Was he always the main Joker? And he was bringing these guys along for the ride just to see what would happen, and then they weren't good enough. Um, I like that there's a lot of different ways you can look at this book, and I could be wrong, but I think he's either, like you said, the one that just didn't want anything to do with the other two, or to me, he could be, and I think I like that way better, but I think he could also be just, he's the only Joker. The other two were just ones that he kind of created to see what would happen, and they didn't pan out.
Well, there's even that fascinating exchange in the ambulance when they've captured him at the end. Batman is riding with Joker, or not the ambulance, the police van where they're taking him to Arkham, I assume. There's that fascinating exchange where Joker says, he's talking about the criminal, the older Joker, and he says, when he created me.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's that pause, and he says, or did I
Or did I
create
create
him?
him? Yep, it's
So
perfect.
it's going right back to that Joker, multiple choice,
Mm-hmm.
unreliable narrator
Yep.
thing. So at the end of the book, I mean, we know no more about the Joker than we started, and we still don't know why there was three Jokers or how that began. But I mean, ultimately, is that kind of a big tease? Yes, but I think also the journey of this story is pretty fascinating as well.
Well, I think
Um,
unfortunately a lot of people saw it as a cop out where we didn't get a definitive answer. But I think the whole point of the Joker is we shouldn't get a definitive answer. Like if we got a definitive answer, I feel like that kind of would never work. And
well, and
you could also say this is my. I mean, the Killing Joke is the most definitive answer we've ever gotten from the Joker's origin, other than like way back in the day, where we have that backstory of his wife and all that, and we're kind of playing into that here too. So if you want to take it as that is the cut and dry Joker with the backstory of the wife and the child and all that, I mean, they go as far as I don't know if you saw this in the Easter eggs. The initials on the briefcase match the initials from the Killing Joke.
mhm, yeah.
So again, I think they're kind of giving you an out. Whatever story you like best, you're getting that multiple choice version.
Well, and my thing is with it here, I mean, there is a pretty clear cut and definitive answer for this version of Batman. Like, for this particular version of Batman, the Killing Joke Joker, that is his Joker.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's even we get a resolution to it at the end. You were just kind of touching on it, but he tells Alfred he's always known who this Joker is. He knows his name, and we even see that Bruce has, he had the death of his wife in the Killing Joke faked. It was
Mm-hmm.
a fake death, and he moved them to Alaska to make sure that Joker never found them, to protect them. And so, I love the very last page where he says, but the Joker's name isn't what's important, and it never has been, which is kind of, I think that's a dual statement there. For the story, it doesn't matter what his name is. And for Joker overall, it's better if you don't know who he is.
Yeah.
And I think that's the whole point. Um, which I really like. And I love that, the end of the story, we get a confirmation that you can very much read The Killing Joke, and then you can read this right behind it, and it's a good 1-2 punch. And if you want to throw Death in the Family in the middle there, that's a good, you have a really good, fun trilogy.
Mm-hmm.
I say fun. There's a lot of death and tragedy in this.
Fun as far as Batman and Joker go, yeah.
Yeah. But one thing I did want to mention before we do move on, right before the end there, you get the letter that Jason, he obviously has feelings for Barbara, and he tapes this letter to her door, and he basically says in it, if you don't think I'm worth one chance, if it was all caught up in, if it was all just caught up in everything, then throw this letter away. And we see that the letter ends up falling off the door, and it's been swept up by this janitor, so she's never going to get this letter, which I think is another one of those, have your cake and eat it too, because obviously Jason wants more of a relationship with Barbara, but she's never going to know it past this point.
I have another question for you.
Okay.
Did you notice the color of the outfit the janitor's wearing?
Well, not to mention it says Fun Time Cleaners on the back.
So I didn't even notice that. So, do you think that is another layer to the Joker just messing with the two of them?
I think that Geoff Johns and Jason Fabok absolutely meant you to question that.
Like like they're meant to just play with your mind a little bit there, make you think about it a little bit more, because there's no way that's not intentional, especially now you said that about the back of the shirt. And I think it's fun to just have stuff like that.
Yeah, I do too. It's like it's one dangling thread that we're probably never going to get any resolution to.
No. And they have talked about a sequel to this, haven't they?
Oh, if they have, I don't know the last time it's been discussed.
Oh yeah, it's been a while. But I
Yeah.
personally I love this as a one off. I think it's I don't want to say perfect, but to me it's one of the most impactful Batman stories we've gotten uh in the last, 20 years.
Well, and I did want to ask you about that, Joe, because I know we were kind of discussing it in a group chat the other day, and I was saying how much because I really do, I love this story. And I know you were downplaying it a little bit because you had said, well, it's not as good as everybody says it is, but it's good. And it feels like you got a little more out of this read. And I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I kind of do want to get your thoughts after you've reread this. Is it still sit there? Do you still not think it's as good as people make it out to be, or what's your feelings on it now?
No, I think you're calling me out on my BS, because you're 100% right. I admit, when I first read this, I thought the story was fine. And
Mm.
I liked the trauma that they were dealing with Jason and Barbara. That was my favorite part of the story. I thought it was good. But I think whenever we read monthlies, I have a hard time of just kind of like reading an issue, waiting a month, reading an issue, waiting a month. And sometimes it does kind of take it away from me. And I might not have had time. For whatever reason, I never reread it. I think I was always waiting to read it in the collected edition. And then when I found out, and this is totally ridiculous, but when I found out that the collected hardcover wasn't going to include any of the alternate covers, I refused to buy the collected edition, and I knew that something else was coming.
Oh, I did as well. I waited
Yeah,
for so I either thought there was going to be a deluxe edition or this, and I'm glad we got
exactly.
this.
And Jason Fabok actually tweeted that, saying, or on Instagram or something, shared that like a deluxe version is coming with the variants. So
Hmm.
that was enough for me to say, okay, I'm not doing it. And I wasn't expecting an absolute this soon, but I'm so glad we got this. And I definitely got way more out of this this time. I do, but I do. I can't talk out of both sides of my mouth here because I understand where the people that are coming from that read this as a monthly and kind of just read it for what it was, expected something different, and kind of went, "Oh, that was cool." I don't blame them because I can see why this book can be read that way. And I'm not saying I'm not saying they're dumb. I'm not saying they didn't care. I'm not saying any of that because I was that guy. Like I just took it for what it was and I moved on. And I love the
Hmm.
art and this and that, but I think there are so many seeds planted in the early parts of this book that lead towards the end of the book, and I think it is a very well thought out story and a very good representation of Batman's relationship with the Joker and what the Joker has done to Barbara and Jason. And I do think it's a really great story. Do I think it's one of the best stories ever told by, in a Batman book? I don't know about that. But I think when something this recent comes out, I'm more hesitant to say something like that, where some people go the other way, where they're like, this is the best thing ever. And sometimes I'm kind of like, just simmer down a little bit. Like it's too new to say that. Um, but I don't know. Like it's hard for me because it is so recent. I mean, I've only read this twice now. It came out 2, 3 years ago. It's hard for me to put it in my top 10 of all time, but I think it's closer than I ever expected. That's for sure.
Nice. Well, that kind of feels like a good final thoughts area. So while you're there, Joe, is there anything else you wanted to say about this book before we wrap it up here?
Um, I'd say if you haven't read it in a while, try to read it and really take your time with the book. I think sometimes I definitely read through these books too quickly. Really pay attention to the panels. I think getting the absolutes makes me enjoy the books more because I spent the money on these deluxe versions and I'm getting it for the big panels and the big art. So I try to dissect it and try to really take it in. Um, the absolute has this great section in the back with all Easter eggs of every like panel that is a homage to something else. Really fun stuff in here. Um, I am so happy I waited for this. Um, yeah, I think just if you were kind of iffy on the book, give it a second chance and really in worst case scenario, you're reading a great Batman story with some awesome art. So it's a win-win to me.
Nice. Awesome. Yeah, I mirror a lot of what you just said. I absolutely love this Absolute Edition. This episode feels like an advertisement for this edition. It's not. We're just excited we have this. But if you're looking for a great way to read this book, I would highly recommend this version because there's so much in it. I mean, the supplemental material in the back of it is amazing. It's fantastic. Very much worth picking up, and don't ever pay full price for these. There's places out there you can get them. If you're looking for somewhere, they're not sponsoring us, so I'm not going to give them ad space, but just reach out. We'll let you know where to find them. Um, but yeah, this story, I was really, because what I'll usually do for big books like this, and I think this may have helped me along, kind of what you were talking about with that monthly fatigue as they were coming out, like I read the first issue when it came out. And then when the second issue came out, I read issues 1 and 2. And then
Yes.
when the third one came out, I read issues 1, 2, and 3. So I
Yeah.
read them as a whole.
And that's what
And
you
I,
should do.
yeah,
it's
and I
what
think
you
that, oh, go ahead.
it's what you should do. You know what held me back from doing that, which is so stupid? I bought so many versions of the print copy. I didn't want to spend extra to buy it digitally, and I never took the floppies out once I bagged and boarded them.
Mm. I get that. But yeah, I mean, I think reading it that way really gave me an appreciation of it as it was coming out, and I have really loved this story since it came out. But I love it in a vacuum. I love it where it's at. It's not like one of these continuity stories that I think just is an epic all timer, but it is one of those stories where it works perfectly if I'm feeling, this type of story. Um, and I do love it as because I wanted to read it as a continuation of The Killing Joke this time, but I just didn't get time. But I may do that later this year, something like that. But I love that we have a story that kind of fits as a sequel to The Killing Joke and Death in the Family. So that's probably how I'll read it going forward. But yeah, I can't I can't heap enough praise on this all star team. Say what you want about Geoff Johns, but he's a hell of a DC writer. Jason Fabok is amazing with that art, and then yes, Brad Anderson and the rest of this team, they just put together a killer book, and I highly highly recommend it. But Joe, we'll wrap it up there on talking about Three Jokers. We're not quite ready to bounce out yet, though, because we do have, as I said earlier, we do have a few listener thoughts to get to, and I wanted to get this one first. We do have an email from Brian Wolf, and it's been sitting there for a little while now, and I feel bad, so I'm sorry, Brian, but I did want to read this. This goes back to the Man of Steel episode. And Brian said, "So I just listened to the Man of Steel episode, and I have to say, you guys just blew my mind. Their suits are CGI. And then later you mentioned Green Lantern had come out the year before. Are you serious?" Now, I don't hate that film. In fact, I really like it, but I'm not blind to how bad those CGI suits were. Just shows how much love and effort Zach and his team put into making this movie. Thanks for what you guys do. It's nice to have another show to listen to alongside Holy Batcast. Brian. Well, Brian, thank you so much for that email. And yes, when I can't believe you've gone this long without discovering that those suits, those Kryptonian armor suits, are CGI. But I had the exact same reaction when I found out because they are beautiful to look at. They're amazing, and it's hard to believe that those are a digital creation. And yeah, good point about Green Lantern being so close and the difference between the quality of those CGI suits. But Joe, I know um, this is a sticking point for you. So I heard you laughing when I was reading that email because it's hard to believe Brian's gone this long without figuring out those suits are CG, right?
Well, I will say Green Lantern was 2011, wasn't it?
Yeah. So Man of Steel was 2 years
So
later.
2 years. Let's give it a little. Yeah, it's still no. I understand his point. His point is still
Yeah.
valid. um, 2011. There's still enough there where they should have been a little better. And I'm with you, Brian. I don't hate that film either. Um, but as far as the Man of Steel suits, yeah, I still remember being blown away watching the documentaries on the disc when we first got it. And I will say, Feora's is practical, if I remember correctly. It's
Hmm.
Zod's and the rest of the Kryptonians, but I think the women are practical, and the men are the CGI ones. But
So Jor-El's armor and Zod's armor, those are CGI.
yeah, um, but yeah, it's I still can't find how I would ever have known that if I didn't see it in the documentaries. Because watching that film, I dare anyone to pick out that is CGI without knowing. Because their suits are great.
I'll say this: I think it's a little easier to tell in the Flash on Zod.
Yeah, I think because it was done differently and it was during the
Yeah.
daytime mostly, which always makes it harder. Even though there are
Mhm.
daytime scenes in Man of Steel, so that excuse doesn't always work.
Right. Yeah. But I mean, that's neither here nor there. That's
Yeah.
just another feather in the cap to how good that team did on those
Hmm.
suits. But thank you so much, Brian, for that email. It's good to hear from you. And then moving on, I know Joe, you had some thoughts from. Is it Lee Anchoret that we have some thoughts from?
Good old Lee. Yeah, he sent me a couple messages after he got out of the Flash, and a couple follow ups. So I'll read the follow up. So it's funny, after the Flash he texted or he messaged me, and he was he was a little harsh on some things. He loved the film though. He's not criticizing the film. He enjoyed it a lot. But he wrote back to me a couple days later after digesting a little bit. He goes, "Hey man, let's see. Um, so I've had some time to reflect on the Batfleck scenes because that was his main criticism was the CGI in the Batfleck scenes. And he
Mhm.
says, "You're right. I was being harsh. I don't hate them. The action scenes are immense, and that is true Batfleck. Couldn't ask for more there. But as soon as Wonder Woman shows up, I still think that part of the scene is JL-17 standard, and I don't like it. And I still think his suit looks bad, and Cal fits badly with his new skinny face. The Barry Bruce scene later, though, is superb." And then he just says, "Thank you, and talk to you later." Um, so to Lee's point, we've discussed this. We didn't really, we didn't get into the lasso of truth thing. I know you were not crazy about it, correct?
Yeah, it wasn't. It definitely wasn't my favorite.
Yeah, I can understand why it can definitely be reminiscent of Justice League. To me, my way of kind of dismissing it, and I told this to Lee, I honestly think a lot of people that were making that scene may have not have seen Justice League 2017. Um, like I don't know if Andy Muschietti knows that scene exists. It's very possible. Like, when you talk to these directors, and again, I know people are going to say, "Ah, you're crazy if you never watched it." But when you talk to these directors post Justice League, most of them consider Zack's version to be the canon version.
Mhm.
Yes, obviously Ben was there. I mean, obviously Gal was there for the lasso scene. Do we really know Ben was there for that scene? Because they filmed a lot of stuff apart, and Ben has nothing to do with that scene.
Yeah, I'm not sure on that. But yeah, other than the lasso, because I mean the lasso is one thing, but I do have a little bit of insight on what Lee's talking about with the suit.
Mm-hmm.
Because you and I have talked about, because I really like following Chris Stanley, or he's known as Cosplay Chris on YouTube,
Mm-hmm.
and he is huge into the the fabricating of these suits, and he's gotten into Hollywood. He started working with some Hollywood productions, and on a recent video he posted, he basically confirmed, and take it for what you will, but he confirmed that the suit that was used was never meant to be worn by Affleck in The
Okay.
Flash. It was built for the stunt double. And they decided at some point to do the bridge scene where he's actually in the suit talking, and he was basically shimmied into this stuntman suit.
So they
So
did say he did wear it, or was it a CGI suit?
no, he did wear it, but it
Okay.
was not meant for him.
So you think they might have doctored it up with CGI?
They may have. I very well could have, because they absolutely did with the Flash's suit, because they smoothed it out. Because there's pictures, behind the scenes pictures, where you can see creases and folds in the suit when he bends
Mm-hmm.
his arms, and in the practical suit is actually separated at the neck, so he can turn his head. But they smoothed that out digitally in the movie.
Hmm.
So they make it look like it's all one piece, but
Yeah.
the actual suit he was wearing is not that way for
And
practicality.
The Flash suit lends better to CGI that way, where
Yeah, it does.
because I had no complaints about the Flash suit in the film at all. I thought it looked great. I know there was a lot of complaints going into the film with maybe the cowl didn't look right. In motion, I never had an issue with any of it.
No, no, me either. And that's when Ben is on or when whoever is on the bat cycle, the bat suit looks decent.
Mhm.
It's when he's on the bridge that it doesn't look
Yeah.
good at all. But it's neither here nor there. It really doesn't take away from, in my opinion, it doesn't take away from the performance, especially that scene with Barry and Bruce in the alley when they're talking. So,
Mhm.
I think that was more of the focused, performance from Ben Affleck. So I can give that a pass, the way the
Yeah.
suit looks.
I
But
have one more thing to discuss from Lee. He
okay,
asked, and you could definitely attest to this. Um, he said it came up again. he asked, actually, I think we were discussing it, and I think Matt brought it up, and then talking about how Bruce had a happy ending at the end of, his run, and that's why he's retired. And Lee said again, Holy Batcast mentioned it also, but he
Mhm.
said if you guys do a follow up, because he said he actually had asked me why I didn't bring up something I brought up to him on the podcast, and it was about the Muschietti podcast that I brought to his attention. Muschietti did an interview where he discussed deleted scenes
Mhm.
with Michael Keaton's Batman. He discussed it on the Real Ben podcast, which me and you both listen to. And Lee wanted to know why we didn't bring that up when we were discussing the episode. And so, do you want
Well,
to talk about that?
yeah, I'll answer that really quickly. It is super hard to remember everything, and unless you have like line by line notes when you're doing a podcast, especially with three people, it's
Yeah.
hard to remember every single thing because there's a ton of stuff I know that I've still forgotten. But either way, on this particular topic, Joe, you're gonna have to jog my memory because I remember Muschietti talking to the Real Blend guys about the deleted scenes, and I remember him talking about Bruce and the quote unquote safe city now,
Yeah.
but I can't remember all of the context. So
So,
help me
and
out.
I don't remember a lot of it either, other than when they asked him about the safe city. Muschietti's like, "Come on, it's Batman. Like, you really think Gotham is safe?" Like, it was something to that extent.
Hmm.
And maybe there were more layers to that in deleted scenes. But again, when you're watching the movie, they don't. I mean, do they give you any hint whatsoever that he's lying there? Maybe, like, you could again kind of see it. It's hard, and you can only go by what you're getting in the film. I never questioned it before we got that interview. But now that
Yeah.
I know about it, yes, it's a little different. And I agree with you as far as the podcast goes. Why we didn't bring it up? I told him, I said, when there's three of us, we're trying not to just talk over each other. So I probably just didn't want to butt in and say anything. And then the next time, it was probably your turn to speak or whatever. So I probably just moved on.
Yeah. And I'll say that I did listen to the Real Blend podcast because it's all coming back to me now. So I listened to the Real Blend podcast on this before my second screening of The Flash because I'd already seen it and I had already kind of found out that the movie was basically the movie. Like there was
Mhm.
nothing in the Real Blend podcast that was going to spoil me on anything that I had not already seen. So I listened to it before my second viewing, and on the second viewing, it does seem like Keaton is like it seems like there's more there
Like
than
tongue in
yes, the
cheek
city's
almost. Like,
almost like it's a cop out answer.
yeah.
So I'm very curious to see when we get the Flash on home media to see what these deleted scenes include. I wish we could get an extended cut, but I don't feel like that's going to happen. I don't think they're going to spend any more money on this thing at this point, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I'm actually kind of surprised we haven't gotten um any info on what is going to be on the digital release yet, because usually we do by now, don't we? Like, we usually find out there will be deleted scenes, or there will be this, or sometimes we even get like the back cover of the Blu-ray by now, or like teased or whatever. So I'm curious what we're going to get, and I hope we get a ton of stuff. If Muschietti's talking about it in interviews, he's got to be hoping that we're getting it, because most directors wouldn't even bring that up if they didn't think we were going to get it.
Yeah, and man, I really hope this thing does well on digital and home media because it deserves it. It deserves much better than it got,
Yeah.
honestly, in the
Yep, I
theaters.
agree.
But I don't want to focus on that and be negative. But um, I will say thank you so much, Lee, for your thoughts. We always love interacting with you, whether it be direct message or email or tweets or however. You've always been supportive, and we appreciate it. But Joe, I feel like that's probably, unless you had anything else, I think that's a good place to wrap it up for the day.
Nope, that's it. Thank you to both of the listeners that sent in questions or comments. It's always fun to get those, especially here, just to kind of go back to, in this case, we went back to Man of Steel for a little bit, and then got to do a little bit more on the Flash before we get into this summer, where we have some some more stuff to cover. We got to cover a comic here, which is fun, and we got some bigger stuff coming up in the next couple weeks.
Good tease, yes. So as you guys know, we do love anniversaries. So upcoming next, our very next episode of the show will be a huge anniversary for a seminal, highly regarded Batman movie. I'm just going to leave it there. If you look at your calendar, you'll kind of figure out which one it is, but I'm just going to leave it hanging there. But thank you so much, Joe. I always appreciate coming on and talking to you. And this was fun to talk about a comic. We haven't done that in a while. So thank you for coming on to do that with me. And why don't you let everybody know where they can find you out there on social media?
You guys can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd as jforn11, and you can find me on Facebook as Joe Fornarato, Fornarotto.
Awesome. And as for myself, you can find my personal accounts on Instagram, Twitter, and Letterboxd. That is mecarter89, mecarter89. The show can be found on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at TFRBatPod. Again, if you have thoughts for the show, you can email us. That email is tfrbatpod@gmail.com. If you're looking for a way to support the show, the best and easiest way to do that is to leave us a rating and review on whatever your podcasting platform is. If you leave us a written review on Apple Podcasts, we will read those on the show. If you're looking for another way to support us, and we don't ask that you spend a dime on this show, but we absolutely appreciate it if you'd like to, you can go to redbubble.com and search Shop TFR, all one word, and you can find our logos created by Justin Kowalski on all kinds of merch. And then our theme song was created by the very talented Gaurav Venkateswar, and his music can be found on gvtunes.com. So for myself and Joe, thank you guys so much for joining us. Go out and read Three Jokers if you haven't yet, and enjoy The Flash as well. And until next time, make sure you keep that bat signal lit and pointed skyward. Batman was created by Bill Finger and Bob Kane, and is the sole property of Warner Bros. Discovery. The Fire Rises, a Batman podcast, is in no way associated with Warner Bros. Discovery, DC Comics, or DC Studios. The thoughts and opinions of the participants of this show are their own, and do not represent the companies that they work for. Thank you for listening. We'll see you on the next episode.